Right. Welcome everybody to Tough Talks. This is a subcategory of the Tough Love podcast. My guest tonight is best-selling author, biblical historian, and all-around awesome guy, Gary Wayne. He is the author of the book The Genesis 6 Conspiracy, which is a fantastic read and is quite a bit of a mind bender if you're wanting to go down the rabbit hole and see exactly what the good book has in store for you should you decide you want to peel back the layers on what exactly took place in Genesis 6. You can find his book in paperback on Amazon for $26.71 or on Kindle for $9.99. Again, Gary is a fabulous wealth of knowledge, and I think the book I started off reading the Kindle version, and I'm not quite sure what exactly Kindle pages equate to in
Yeah,
real pages.
they never line up.
No, I think I'm like on page 620 in Kindle pages, and I'm not exactly sure what the lands on my physical pages. But if you're interested in seeing what the book is all about, Gary has a very generous excerpt of this book on his website, thegenesis6conspiracy.com. You owe it to yourself to, even if you're not going to read the whole thing, read a few chapters. There is so much in here. This is, correct me if I'm wrong, but this is the culmination of 30 years worth of research.
Yeah, it would, and you might even say more, but not a whole bunch more, but a little bit more because it was this ongoing sort of project. So when I started doing research, I wasn't intending on necessarily writing a book. I just wanted to find things out for myself, and particularly on prophecy. That's because I had somebody scare the socks off of me with a challenge. And they said, if you got the courage, we have a book for you to read. And I said, okay, well, I'm like 20 or 21. I'm going, oh yeah, I'm not afraid of nothing. And
Sure.
and I had no idea what book they might be suggesting, but it was The Late Great Planet Earth by Hal Lindsey.
I'm reading that right now.
Yeah.
Oh,
And considering when he
geez.
wrote it in the late 60s and I read it like in 1980 or 81, I mean, it scared the socks off me. So I wanted to verify whether or not he was being accurate. And was he manipulating things? Did he leave
Mm-hmm.
out things? And when I started to check it out, the passages seemed to be legitimately quoted, and things seemed to line up, and I thought he was way ahead of his time, and still think he was way ahead of his time. But that started me to say, well, that's not enough for me, though. I need to verify this myself completely. And so it put me on the path back to God, and I started to
Wonderful.
write down all of the passages in prophecy. And like you writing your research on the wars, you just don't realize how many different narratives there are in on those types of things in the Bible until you start to say, hey,
Yeah.
I'm going to, use highlighters or whatever, or files it. So I had to start and do it again several times because my approach was inadequate to properly log it. And, along the way in Genesis 6, I mean, you run across these crazy things called giants. And I didn't want anything to do with that. I'm going, whatever that is, that's not what I'm here to do. I'm going to work on what I wanted to find out.
Sure.
Trouble is, it kept coming up, right? So by about 1995 or so, 1996, I thought, I've got everything logged, and I actually gone back and logged in things about the fallen angels and logged in things like the demons and the giants
Mm-hmm.
because they just seem to be connected to the prophecy trail. And you've got demons and fallen angels and end time prophecy, and they seem to be related to it's angelic rebellion. The
Mm-hmm.
sons of God are created by the fallen angels. There's just this sort of connection that I thought I should log all of that. So I decided I would write a short book. That was the plan because I've
Yeah,
got like
short
15 or
book.
20 books I'd like to write, and based on my research. And so I thought, but I don't have a platform. I'm not a minister. I don't have a theology degree. I'm just your average Joe who said, here's what I've learned. And can I sort of communicate that properly? So, no platform, no nothing. And so I wrote the first 10 chapters fairly quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And then I thought, when I was growing up and before I had come back to this research, where prophecy became my absolute passion as
Hmm.
well as giants. I had this passion of history and mythology when I was young, and I read a lot. And I just was fascinated by the
Hmm.
whole thing, and thinking, okay, well, it's just kind of like interesting fantasy because, and a lot of it because it's like
Sure.
movies, right? And it's like, but was it all really real? And you're told we don't know what's real and what's not real, and all that sort of stuff. But I saw all of these commonalities, particularly in Greek mythology and Sumerian mythology, and around the world they tell the same story about the flood, and they tell the story about the giants and the survival and things like that, and or how they show up after the flood. So I thought I need to mix some of that in. And then when I did that, I realized I'm not giving Christians proper context, right?
Okay.
Because I'm just saying it's the same, but I don't give them proper context. Yeah, I'm lining it up with what the Bible says, but so then I had to learn about their religions. So I had to read about all the different Gnostic religions, the different kinds of religions like Hinduism, the different types of uh, scriptures that they have in India, whether it's the Upanishads or it's the Vedas or the
Sure,
Bhagavad
sure.
Gita. And then I had to read about the Kishamaya and the Popol Vuh, and I read the Mormon book, and I read everything I could get my hands on to get a better understanding of what their culture was, because their culture in polytheism was
Hmm.
polytheism, right?
Hmm.
And so you have to provide the context. And then I learned that when they started to develop their cult of knowledge, gnosis, Gnosticism, as we understand it in the West, that led me into the development of these really weird, strange things called mystery schools. Odd name, part of the
Yeah.
mystical religion for only the elite, that they taught them in degrees of education, just as they did in the mystical religion, except that was focused in a specific agenda and or smaller
Hmm.
area for development. And then I understood, coming out of that, they had subsects within the mystery schools that we would know as secret societies, just as you have all of these different initiatory groups on university today, because it's the same
Yes.
thing. 7 sacred sciences, 7 liberal sciences, the same thing. And so then that led me down the rabbit hole. Well, I have to learn about secret societies because I don't know anything about them. So
Sure.
then I went down that, and I was down there for a long time, and it's just so massive. And I
Well, I
wasn't
mean,
sure whether or not I'd
your
ever
book
begun.
is this thick.
Well, I left
Like,
300 pages out too,
oh my gosh. Yeah.
because
Like,
it was,
okay.
but you could
Now,
write forever on it, right?
well,
So
now that I'm thinking 600 pages Kindle wise, I'm I'm
oh yeah.
probably only about that
Yeah.
far in now.
Yeah. So I don't know what chapter you're on, but there's 98 chapters. So in the written text of the hard copy, it's over 800 pages, but there's 120 pages of endnotes in there. So
Wow.
one of the things I wanted to do, and then I'm doubling down on the sequel that'll be out later this year, just trying to see
Wonderful.
where we're at in terms of the publishing process right now. It's a go. It's just a matter of who and where is going to be doing it, because we're
Sure.
reconsidering the publisher is reconsidering using another publisher that's got larger resources, more distribution, more marketing, stuff like that. So we're working through that sort of process. So, but I have a bibliography in there that people just say, it's worth the money to have that bibliography. But what I really wanted to do was to make sure I did the footnotes so that everybody could verify if they wanted what I was saying. Because what
Hmm.
I talk about is so crazy
It's
if
so
you've not been
vast.
interested to it, and so vast that I thought I better do this in a way that they can verify it. And if they don't like the sources, then they'll call me out on it. If not, they won't, because
Sure.
you just can't just say, well, it doesn't, he's just making it up, except, well, he's got 120 pages of footnotes.
Yeah. Well, and looking when I was because I started reading Hal Lindsey's book, Late Great Planet Earth,
Yep.
a little over a couple weeks, a little over 3 weeks ago,
Yep.
and I'm almost done with that one. But I noticed that you guys both have a very similar footnote style, and I really appreciate that in books because, like you said, it does give people the chance to actually vet what you're saying and not just
Yeah.
take it at face value.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and that
Exactly.
thing is well worth having, like you said, just for the footnotes
Yeah.
alone.
Yeah. And what I'm saying is, in my approach, is that I don't have all the answers, but here's what I've learned.
Hmm.
And if you can take it further, take it further.
Sure. And that's a
And
perfect
that's the
segue.
and that's the platform for them. So
Well, Gary, we are very, very honored and blessed to have you on the stream tonight. Like I said, that's a perfect segue into the topic of conversation tonight, which is going to be on it's a kind of a two-parter topic. It's addressing the grandiose violence that we see all throughout the Old Testament in the Bible by way of establishing who exactly these Canaanite tribes were and the tribes that Israel was up against during the conquest of Canaan and then their flight from
yeah,
Egypt. Because a lot of people, and when I was just really getting into biblical research, a lot of the questions that were posed to me was, how do you explain all the seemingly wanton violence inside the Bible where God says to Joshua, I want you to wipe out of these tribes every man, woman, and child. I want you to kill all the cattle, save only the bronze, silver, and copper vessels and gold vessels, everything else devoted to destruction. Because it seems on its face like, wow, that's a little much. That's, maybe dial it down like 20% here. But that'll be it. My goal is for tonight's talk to provide people with the context that they need to be able to explain that violence by knowing exactly who these tribes were and what they were to Israel.
yeah,
So, without further ado, as I mentioned in some of my own research shortly before the show, I'll save a long story. I'll shorten it here, but I was posed a number of questions by a cousin of mine, and they all had to do with the Bible. One was on the topic of slavery. Was I aware the Bible condoned slavery? Was I aware that the Bible condoned genocide and supported genocide? It was a litany of very, very emotionally based
yeah.
questions, which I didn't have answers for at the time. So I said, you know what? I'd love to answer these now, but I'm just not read enough to be able to handle this. Give me some time and I'll find the answers for you. And one of the questions in answering the question of, well, how do you explain the violence specifically towards the Amalekites led me down the path of studying the Nephilim and the Rephaim. And my wife is actually the first one who stumbled upon your website, and she said, babe, you need to hop on here and check this guy out because this is a rabbit hole I was not prepared for. And so I said, okay, well, let me sit down. And I started pouring through that very, very generous excerpt you have inside there. And it was like, I'd get through one chapter and I'm like, oh, I need to go call my parents or read some scripture or something here. This is more than I was ready for. But I kept reading and kept reading. And it helped me explain to my cousin, okay, well, this is the reason for the violence here. But it led me on a deeper dive into, okay, well, instead of just addressing this one instance of violence inside the Bible, specifically towards the Amalekites, what about all these other instances with tribes that have 6 syllables in there that I can't quite pronounce properly without the proper or chutzpah that I need? So I put out a search online for just giant tribes that existed in the Bible.
Yeah.
And almost every website I've found lists the same 36 tribes. And so I decided to take each one of those one at a time and just looking at the Bible as a basis, try and find all that I could on them. And I think I've got it narrowed down to about 29 tribes. So I wanted to run these by you in like
Sure.
2s and 3s and see where you land.
There's a lot, but there's not 36 tribes.
Yeah, I didn't think there was 36.
In the Bible.
Yeah.
And then you get into the nuances of what's a hybrid giant human and what's a purebred giant tribe.
Sure.
Different
And
classifications of that.
one of the things that I really enjoyed that both you and Chuck Missler touched on was, while all the original Nephilim were all giants, as bloodlines get diluted through generations, it's not necessarily a given that they're all going to be monstrous size, but they are half breeds.
And we'll end up, since things you've brought it up, I'll end up talking about at some point in time why they interbred with humans and why those bloodlines became diluted.
Sure. All right. Well, let's kick it off here. I've got them listed alphabetically.
Okay.
So
we can go off one at a time. I'll say yes or no or give an explanation.
Perfect. This should be a pretty easy layup here. The Amalekites.
Yes and no.
Okay.
So the Amalekites that most people are familiar with are created in Genesis 36 through Timnah, who is a Horim and a Horim tribe. and she's the offspring of Seir, of the dukes, the Alephs of Edom, right?
Okay.
And her brother is Lotan. So she is a giant, a female giant. And a lot of people ask me about, well, why is there never any females listed? Well, sometimes you just don't know the names,
Sure.
right? There's a couple other ones, but anyways, she marries Eliphaz, son of Esau.
Okay. Okay.
Right. And Esau is the one that the Amalekites, that the Israelites, Jacob in particular, before his name is changed to Israel, he's the twin brother of Esau, and he
Mhm.
steals the blessing and the birthright and the Messianic um, blessing as well, because in two different times he seizes that. So there's this rivalry that's going to develop down through the ages. So the Edomites, they move into the land of Edom, uh, Edomea, and Esau and his descendants will intermarry with the giants. So I won't go through the names that Esau married to create hybrid giants, because he's obviously not a giant. He's from the Abrahamic bloodline, but
Mhm.
they name Timnah and Eliphaz create a new nation called Amalekites, and this is a hybrid nation.
Okay.
And they take that name sort of eponymously or patronymically, you could probably say both on that, from a tribe of giants named the Amalekim, and they're going to go live amongst them and create the
Amalek.
I'm sorry, the Agag dynasty. Now we know that this is a different group than the Amalekim, as I would like to call them. I will call giant tribes with an I am, which is the male plural, which
Mhm.
means ones. And so they all have a meaning to the name, and it's sort of assigned with ones. So, like, for example, Nephilim are the giant ones. So
Mhm.
the Rephaim, the Seraphim are the serpent-faced ones, the angels,
Sure,
right? It's
sure.
plural, and so you understand it sort of that way. Amalekim, or Amalekites, as they're badly translated out of Hebrew, first show up in Genesis 14, not Genesis 36. So there's a
Huh.
people there. Now, what's really interesting about Genesis 14 is that's the war of the Mesopotamian giants
Yes.
against the regional area of the land of the covenant giants. And they are a giant nation that's listed there before. And the Amalekim were listed not only in southern Edom, but also in the east. And so there seems to have been a migrations first to the Mesopotamia area, and then not too long after, either another branch along with some other giant nations went down to live in the Edom area region, or Mount Seir, which is named after Seir, uh, the patriarch for Timnah. And Seir goes
Wow.
back to the Hebrew word satir, which is a goat god.
Huh. Wow. Gosh, it's also connected. So now in
Yeah.
Genesis
So those are
14,
two tribes there. One's
okay,
hybrids.
so
And,
Genesis 14, was
yep.
that when is it I forget, I'm probably gonna butcher the name. Chedorle Omer, isn't he the one who came out on top in that one?
Yeah. Well,
Okay.
he's the one he's actually more of a vassal of the the third dynasty. He's the tax collector. And
Okay.
that's why you get two sort of different orders of the listings of those Mesopotamian kings. And so one is for the story as to who the Canaanites and the Sodomite Pentapolis had decided to stop paying the vassal tribute.
Gotcha.
So, right, and that's
Piper
what
came
it's
a
talking
calling.
about in the narrative there, right? So, yeah, so he's part of the the third dynasty, and all of the kings, and there's one of the kings in there that's from the the third dynasty. So, um, he is one of the kings, but he's not the leader. This is
Okay.
the era of the empire of the third dynasty.
Wow. Wow, wow. So essentially waging war, is waging war by proxy through him, essentially.
Yeah,
Outstanding.
yeah. And
Okay.
what's interesting is as you get into that war, they don't attack the Sodomites first, and they're pentapolis of cities. Pentapolis is in 5 city states, which is a very important concept to understand the military structure of the giants and the hybrid giants. What they do first is they go and they attack the Rephaim
Hmm.
of Mount Hermon and other tribes. I don't want to jump ahead on the tribes. And then they
Sure.
go down in the south and they take care of all of those other Rephaim giant nations, because they're the ones who are protecting the hybrids, and in particular Sodom and Gomorrah and the cities of the plains. So they are going to take out the worst of the the military threats
Sure.
before they go in and recapture Sodom and Gomorrah and make them a vassal state again.
Fascinating. Gosh, you pull one tiny thread and this whole thing just
it goes in 1,000 different directions.
Oh my gosh. No wonder it took you 30 years to get all the research together.
Yeah.
All right. Well, moving right along. Next up, I've got the Amorites.
Yeah. Amorites are hybrids.
Okay.
Amorites are a patriarchless nation that is listed in the Table of Nations, which is in Genesis 10 and First Chronicles. They're part of 9 of the tribes of Canaan, but they're listed as families. And so,
okay,
whereas Heth would be for the Hittites be a patriarch, and Sidon a patriarch for the Sidonians, and Canaan for the Canaanites, you don't get a patriarch. And the usual assumption there is that they descended from the 3 patriarchs, but the Bible doesn't say that. So who they are the hybrids from the Anakim, which is another tribe of giants. And Arba was the patriarch for the Anakim. And we learn that in the book of Joshua. He's listed twice. And his city, capital royal city, was Kiriath Arba.
Yes, yeah, okay. I actually just read through that chapter a week or 2 weeks ago.
And Arba was the greatest of the Anakim. And Kiriath Arba is the antiquity name for Hebron, which is just south of Jerusalem and in the area where Abraham first moved to. So he was associating with these even before. It just, as you start to understand, for the audience, once you start to understand who these peoples are, it just opens up the doors of context and understanding of what was really going on back there. Now, Amorites are depicted on reliefs as blonde-haired and blue-eyed and pale-skinned. The Anakim were also blonde-haired, blue-eyed, and pale-skinned. And so the name Amorite would come from a giant named Amar or Emor. And what's the closest name to that, and as you take it back from a patronymic kingship title that's being passed on, which is also key to understand what's going on in the Old Testament, you have Hamor of Shechem, of another group of giants, who Israel is actually going to have a situation with Dinah, and they want Dinah to marry her to sexually violate it, and they slay them all.
Hittites, yes.
No, Hivim.
Not the Hittites. Oh, Hivims, sorry.
Hivim, as opposed to the Hivites, because there's both.
Okay.
These are the Hivim. And Hamor would be, from a Hebrew perspective, very, very close to Amor or Amar. And it seems that name probably comes from a god of the Baalim, Amaru.
Okay. Wow.
And so a giant would have had a similar name, probably very close to the Hebrew word for Amorite, which they would have taken that name patronymically and eponymously.
Wow. Boy, like you were saying, it's like you touch on one and then they're somehow linked to 2 or 3 others here, because I think we've already been able to touch on 4 tribes at least, if I've got my notes correct.
So in my new book, I go through all of this and take these guys back to patriarchs.
Bless you. Bless you, Gary.
It's very complex.
Yeah.
But you start to see this picture being formed. So let me knock off one more off your list. We talked about the Horim and the Horites, right? So Horim are red-haired, hazel-eyed, and pale-skinned giants. Okay, different branch of the giants, but very much connected to the Anakim, and living in the same sort of region, but different cities and different pentapolis city-states.
Okay,
they all had 5. A royal city would have 4 more city-state satellites, and they'd have all of these walled villages and things like that as part of the military complex. So just to sort of knock them off. In Horites, you will see them listed, or Horites and Horim listed in the Old Testament both ways. So
I've
in
seen
Deuteronomy
that.
2, they're listed as Horim. And then you got Horites, and they don't do a very good job of trying to distinguish which are they. What I would deduce is that the Horim are intermarrying with some Edomites, but through Horim patriarchs like Hori, listed in
Sure.
Genesis 36, creates that form of hybrid giant as opposed to the purebred, and opposed to the Edomites that would have Esau posterity
Sure.
patriarchs that were interbreeding with females from the Horim.
Wow. Wow.
Starts to make some
Wow.
sense.
Yeah.
That,
Well, and with the
and
different
that's why you have
names.
the Dukes of Edom listing both the Dukes of Esau's descendants and the Dukes of Seir's descendants.
So deep. Wow. Well, and like you mentioned, different names being used in multiple different ways. Like
Yeah,
it's kind of similar with the Zamzumim or Zamzumin or Sidonians versus Zidonians.
yeah.
Um, Outstanding. Real quick, we have a super chat here from Thomas Furman. Would just like to support you. Remember, everyone, it's funny to laugh at Ark of the Covenant induced hemorrhoids, golden or otherwise.
Yeah,
Have a good chat, guys.
yeah.
for
I write
anyone
about
not,
that. I write about that in detail in the new book as well.
can't wait. Oh
Because
gosh,
nobody ever takes that on.
no, and for
But you
anybody
have to
who,
understand the context and
yeah,
the Philistine military complex of that time as well.
yeah, for anybody who's not well aware, just read about the time in the Bible when the Philistines decided to steal the Ark of the Covenant. You'll have
Yes,
yourself a good laugh.
yes, yes.
Thank you very much for that,
One would
Tom.
imagine those would be giant hemorrhoids too.
Oh gosh, yeah. Who's the poor guy who had to pose for those? Like, all right, can you hold still there? We're working on the forge here.
Yes.
Oh gosh. Well, okay. So I've got, let's see, the four
But
crossed off.
it also has another meaning, but we won't go into that. I'm off topic.
Maybe we'll circle back around. All right, so I've got a few taken care of. This one also should be another easy layup here. The Anakim.
Yeah, the Anakim, as I said, are giants. And whether or not they're listed as Anakites, the only thing that I see connected in the passages, I don't see a hybrid nation of Anakites other than like the Amorites.
Okay, gotcha. Okay,
Now, they may have also listed, had some of their giants maybe who have started some other tribes that I couldn't trace back to Anakim, even though I say this is going to be the patronymic name. I'm not able to say is that one of all of these other specific tribe of all of these nomenclature names of giants, but definitely the Amorites would be one of their hybrids, and Amorites lived amongst them, but the Amorites lived in other areas as well, so it gets a little bit complicated that way as well. But the Anakim, they are giants, whether it's Anak, Anakim,
mm-hmm.
Anakite, and their name means long necked. So they had long necks, like a serpentine neck, probably
Interesting.
wide and probably flared out as what you would have seen with the cobra image with the pharaohs in
I was
Egypt.
just gonna ask that. Yep.
Because they wouldn't be long, gangly necks, because these beasts were strong. So you get words like strong and stout and words like that. Their height to width ratio is thought to be 2-to-1 versus 3-to-1 of the humans. So if you
Goodness.
have, for example, Goliath, who's 6 cubits and a span, he was the king of Gath. So I'm putting him at 11 feet, maybe up to 3 inches on a 21-inch.
Sure, the royal cubit.
Royal cubit versus you would have been 9'9" on a standard cubit. But Josephus said measure him by the royal cubit because that's how giants were measured, right? So,
Wow.
and so he would have been 5 feet wide, 6 feet wide.
Goodness.
Yeah. Now look at Oggs Bed. It
Yes.
was
Yep.
9 cubits and 4 cubits wide. He is the king of Ashtaroth, the king of Edrei, king of 60 pentapolis or 5 pentapolis city states. He was a powerhouse that was unbelievable. His bed is 9 cubits, which would be, up to 16 feet tall, close to 16 feet tall as a royal cubit, and 7 feet wide.
My
So he would have
gosh.
been somewhere, depending on the cubit size, 12 to 15 feet tall and 4 to 6 feet wide.
Wow.
And
Now,
he's not as wouldn't have been as tall as Gilgamesh, which isn't in the book, but just as one more comparative, both in the Ugaritic texts and in the Epic of Gilgamesh and in the Epic of Itzubar, which is talking the same stories, just different names, he is 11 cubits and 4 cubits wide, and king of Uruk. So he'd be measured on the 21 inches. He's over 19 feet tall and
whoa,
7 feet wide.
whoa. Oh, it's a big old boy right there. My
Yeah. So,
gosh.
I mean, we're not talking about being a foot taller. Now, the hybrids, as the Egyptians called them, they're the Shazu. Other names you might hear are Amal and Shamal. And
Okay.
that becomes through the Hyksos relationship that we probably won't get into tonight. But they're thought to be 6 to 9 feet tall, as they're listed in sources like the Egyptian execration texts and things like that. So
Wow.
hybrids,
Wow.
half
Wow.
human, half giant, but not as tall as Goliath and not as tall as Og would have been.
Sure. And I can imagine you might have an anomaly in there every
Yeah,
once in a while.
yeah,
One comes to
and
mind, the one that one of David's mighty men slays,
yeah,
when it's
yeah,
recanting his like 5 main guys who really went
yeah,
to town.
yeah. And then Og's Bed was kept on display as a museum for many, many years in the city of Rabbah. Um,
Really?
and it was left there, as we're told, because the writers of the Bible and wanted people to remember what Israel was up against. And when the word giant that they refer to as these different tribes, and they wanted them to understand the size of these giants.
Sure.
So that was sort of a living image. And Josephus even said up to his time, they were still on display, these giant bones in museums
My
that had no
goodness.
real kinship to
Yeah.
human bones in terms of the size and some of the differences, but they're a hybrid angelic being who took a physical form and passed that DNA on.
My goodness. Now, I know in one of the translations, I think it's the NIV translation, because I was looking up specifically about Og and his bed. Some of the pushback from that, people they cite various kings throughout Asia and India often having very gargantuan beds just as sort of a status symbol, and they were saying, "Oh, he probably wasn't actually that tall
Yeah.
because of the whole
So,
status thing."
yeah.
But
And
then,
what they do is they conflate the ritual beds where they would have sex, which would have been, they would
okay,
have been way bigger and are way bigger in places where they found them, like in Mesopotamia, with the bed that he slept in. This
sure,
is the
sure,
bed he slept in, not
okay,
the one they had the rituals done in, the sexual
sure.
orgies and stuff like that in the temples, right? It's again, what people do when they're using misinformation, they only provide part of that information. Some of it might be true, but they selectively edit what they're communicating. And
Sure.
again, that's one of the things I try and do is never present half the case.
Yeah, and I appreciate that too. And like inside your book, there's a number of little segues that you end up going on because it's
Yeah.
like you establish a point, but then you have to provide all the foundation for that
Yes.
point. And I'm one who likes to argue both sides of the fence too. So I'm
Yeah.
right there with you, Gary.
Yeah.
Um, and one last note on that bed. So in the one translation that I was looking at, it translated to sarcophagus. Now I went straight to the NASB.
No, it doesn't translate to
Yeah,
sarcophagus.
I didn't figure that was
No.
correct, so I was like, "This everything else here says bed." I went to NASB, and
Yeah.
sure enough, it was bed there, and I'm like, "Well,
Yeah.
I mean, it's the driest, but that's the one that's gonna give me the
Yeah.
closest word for word."
Yeah. Now, it doesn't mean he didn't have a sarcophagus, because most kings did. And with the Rephaim, which he was, and his name also means long neck as well. So
Hmm.
kinship with the Anakim, and with most of these Rephaim, and he's a giant. So that word giant goes back to the Hebrew word Rapha and the
Mhm.
male plural I am. So the word giant only goes back to Nephilim 3 times in the Bible. once in Genesis 6:4, and twice in Numbers 13:33. And so in Numbers 13:33, this is part of the evil embellished report to terrify the Israelites. And what they're saying is the Anakim are giants, and it says that twice, or the children of giants, and that's the word Nephilim. That's not accurate. Doesn't mean they didn't see the giants, as in Talmai, Sheshai, and Ahiman, kings of Hebron, Kiriath Arba, as Anak, as Anakim, but there was also other nations that were hybrids in there that were like the Amalekites and the Amorites, who we've talked about, and the Hivites, and a few other ones that they listed, but these were a separate breed. These were the giant kings, and the giants were the kings over the hybrid nations as well. So they set up their dynasties over those nations as well. Now, we know that the Anakim are not Nephilim because in Deuteronomy 2, where the Anakim and the Horim and the Avim and the Zamzuzim and the Emim are listed as giants, that's the Hebrew word Rapha.
Okay.
So all the other times in the Old Testament, except for once in the book of Job, where it's translated in the King James Version as giant, that one goes back to Gibor or Gibborim, which is a description of the giants. So I don't disagree with the translation there as a giant, but it doesn't mean it's specifically talking about a true Nephilim, right?
Sure. Sort of a semantic issue there.
Yeah, just as Cush is a mighty one and a Gibborim. A Gibborim can describe a giant, can describe a powerful warrior, doesn't have to be. It can describe a man, it can call him noble, it can mean the strength of God, it's the strength, the excellence of angels. It's used 155 times in the Old Testament, but not always for a giant. So you have to understand the application, right? In terms of Gibor. The other 25 times where giant shows up in the Old Testament, it's either going to show up as Rephaim or giant, where it goes back to the word Rapha. So Rephaim shows up as a tribe twice, literally translated as Rephaim, even in the KJV version, and that's in Genesis 14, the War of Giants.
Yep.
In Mount Hermon. And the second time Rephaim shows up is in Genesis 15, when God is laying out the land from the Euphrates to the Nile that he's going to gift to Abraham, and the Rephaim are listed amongst the mighty seven and the mighty 10.
Wow. Oh, I'm gonna have to go back and watch the stream myself, because like I've totally just blown my notepad apart here. I can't hardly read what I've scratched here. Wow, my goodness.
So I'm not sure where we were here, but anyways, we got going on some details on giants.
I don't mind the meandering. Yeah. Like I said before, I really appreciate it because it provides a context that is so necessary here. And wow, we were up to 28 viewers. Thank you guys for stopping by. Another quick super chat here from Thomas Furman again. Can I ask Mr. Wayne, what is the other meaning of hemorrhoid? This will be the last off-color comment I make, but I'm too fascinated to not ask, coming from his knowledge base. Thank you both.
Yeah, so I mean, you've got these tumors, these emerods that are being created as a representation of mice as well. There's two types of gold things, and both of them are to the emerods are to represent the tumors, and also to represent, because there's 5 of them, the 5 kings of the Philistine Pentapolis cities.
Interesting. And these were what were put back inside the Ark of the Covenant after the Philistines were afflicted by plague because they stole the Ark of the Covenant, and they put the hemorrhoids and the mice in there as a gift to God's people to say, hey, please ease on up. We're tired of not being able to sit any longer.
Exactly. Yeah.
Very good. Thank you for that, Gary.
And the mice is the mice network of the Philistine military complex. So the mice represents not just the kings, but then all of the villages that mar the land. Wow. It's the whole thing that they're saying our whole confederacy of giants
and apologizing
hybrids. Here. Yeah. Don't destroy us and send this plague away.
Oh my gosh.
Because I doubt whether they had Vaseline or anything like that back then. I mean,
oh my goodness, they were probably rendering fat to help out there. Um,
Yeah, I know
moving.
people have got some images in there they wish they didn't
Yeah,
have,
right.
but
Well, welcome to the Bible study, y'all.
yeah.
Um, so next up here, I've got two names. It's the Ashtothites and the Ashdodites.
Oh, those are a city of Ashdod.
Okay. Oh,
That's part of the
Ashad.
yes, that's part of the Philistine network. So the Philistines are hybrids. Um, they come from Casualim who will produce them. So there's something that's going on. So they're going to intermarry while they're in Egypt or more likely in Crete because they migrate to Egypt and then they migrate to Crete after that. And there's also Philistines that I cover off as well in the time of Abraham. So even before that. So, and then they come back because obviously they have uh, relatives that are still there of the Philistines, like Abimelech is one of the ones that Abraham, he's the king of the Philistines there at that time. But it's the ones who come back in about 1550 BC, about 100 years or so, maybe a little bit more before the Exodus. And they
Okay.
expropriate the land of Gaza and they push out much of the Avim, as Deuteronomy 2 talks about.
Yeah.
They push out much of the Anakim and other giants. But understand that Avim are still going to have Gaza and the Anakim, the Avim are going to have Gaza. The Anakim are still going to have Gath, and they're going to have Ashdod. So if those are giants, they're going to be either Avim or Anakim, but they lived in the city of Ashdod, so they'd be called by that as one of the acronyms, just as Goliath
Okay.
was a Gittite from Gath. Doesn't mean Gittite, it's the city of Anakim, part of that later becomes part of the Philistine Confederacy. And so the Philistines
Okay.
then migrate with the Cherithim and the Pelathim,
Okay.
and the Kafarim, which are giants, Indo-Aryans that were living in Crete. And so you see Philistines depicted with dark hair and some with light hair. So you've got a mix of the ones that were originally in the Philistine, in the Gaza area, southern land of the covenant, and then the ones who have intermarried with the Indo-Aryans, the dark-haired ones, which would be akin to Gilgamesh, and
Sure.
right, with the dark-haired ones, right? And migrate back at probably because of the Santorini eruptions where this islands become unlivable and they go back to where the Hyksos were part of and to the Philistines who had settled there, because the Hyksos who leave again before the Exodus, they're the ones who put Israel into slavery because there's a pharaoh that comes up that
Yep.
Joseph didn't know, which makes no sense, but it's a foreign
Yeah.
thing. That's the Hyksos who take over, and they're from, well, I won't go through that whole spiel unless it comes up tonight. But
Sure.
anyways, it's the I lost my. Oh, anyways, they're the dark-haired giants that are part of that sort of northern range. It's the Greek area, the Greek Empire, Achaia. You have the dark-haired ones that are in Mesopotamia with the Aryans and the Persians.
Now, is that where
Right?
we get like a lot
Assyrian
of the
kings have
Anunnaki?
dark hair and those dark beards, so it's part of that strain. So
Is
they're the ones who come back with those giant nations to the land of the covenant that are going to push out the Anakim and the Avim to a certain point, but then put them back into the Philistine Confederacy as
got
part of
you.
the what I call larger Southern alliance of giants.
So then, with the ones in Assyria that you just mentioned, is that where we get sort of the stories about the Anunnaki and those
Oh,
pretend?
from Mesopotamia, or
Yeah, sorry,
did you?
Mesopotamia,
Yeah.
Mesopotamia.
Well, yeah. So in Mesopotamia, you have the Anunnaki of heaven and Anunnaki of the earth because they created giants themselves. They're the demigod kings. So an Anunnaki angel or a god is depicted usually on reliefs as having a bird face
Hmm.
and wings and these very stocky, wide, strong legs. And they're usually doing this ritual around this sort of technology, or what they would call in
Yeah.
occultism some sort of tree of life or energy or something like that. And you also see these Anunnaki that are depicted as a human face. So these
The
are,
long hair, the curls.
yeah, just like you would see Gilgamesh being depicted or Nimrod, right? So because understand that when they reproduce in that physical body, whether it's a human face or a bird face, they're going to produce giants that look just like them,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so Gilgamesh would probably be from the cherubim watcher, because the cherubim, when they take their form on the earth, they take one face of four at a time. But we get different depictions. So you get like the falcon gods, or um, you have the
Like
Tengu
Osiris
in,
there.
yeah. Oh, well, Osiris is a serpent god.
Oh, wait, who am I thinking?
Horus
Oh, sorry,
is a
Horus.
falcon
Horus,
god.
that's the
Yeah.
one.
Right. And then you have the Tengu, which are these bird face creatures, offsprings of the gods in Southeast Asia, China, India, Japan. And then you have the Zabalba in the Popol Vuh. And these were all demigod giants because they were seemingly created by these cherubim. So if it was a lion face, which we see on caribs, cherubim, and other names, sphinxes. You have a bull and ox as the other face. So you get all these different depictions on the sphinx-like creature, and then you also have these giants with similar types of faces as well. Just as you have linemen of Moab, and the lion-like uh, men of Gad, that or wilderness men, Gibberim, as you take that back to Hebrew. And then you have this Arioch, that's one of the kings of the Mesopotamians, and Arioch, which is partially rooted etymologically with Aryan, because of the Aryans, Indo-Aryans, as they're known in polytheism, and the Aryans that the Achaemenids take their bloodlines back to, of the Persian kings of the Persian Beast dynasty. You have Arioch, which means lion-like.
Huh. My gosh. It just keeps unraveling further and
the
further
more
and
you,
further.
the more you dig, the more you find, and it just doesn't seem to stop. And
Wow.
but the trick is can you put it together with some connections and not
Yeah.
sound like a raving lunatic? And
Well, that's what the second book is for, right?
yeah, well, just for the Christians, they want they've told me over and over and over and over and over, and I'm Christian, that they want to know more of what's in the Bible and go real deep. So I go real
Excellent.
deep on the second book.
We have a question in from Ian Roland. He says, "So many religions find their gods in these giants."
Partially, the religions come from the fallen angels, and so they're known, as pantheons, right? And they have a similar pantheon all around the world. It's the same hierarchy. It's the same wandering stars of the seven that are the major ones. They just have different vernacular names. So I think there was sort of one common main pantheon, a lot of sub pantheons around the world. So these are fallen angels. So Zeus is a fallen angel. His father Kronos is a fallen angel. So the best way I can
Hmm.
bring that back to the Bible is the Canaanite Pantheon. El is the parent god.
Yes.
Baal is the offspring god, as with Mot, and both created giants. El before the flood, Baal and Ashtaroth after the flood create the
Hmm.
Rephaim. And in the Ugaritic texts, they're doing fertility rituals to bring Baal and Ashtaroth back. They don't explain where they are, but they need to come back. I know where they are. They created giants after the flood, so they're in the abyss too, just like their parents went there, because
Wow.
they're
Wow.
having fertility issues after the flood, versus the ones before the flood had no fertility issues. So again, they're distinct, not only in name, not only in time, but in terms of some of the characteristics, which seem to be somewhat diminished in terms of their size and certainly their fertility issue and probably some other of the strengths.
Is that why you see so many Asherim poles then, sort of in homage to the fertility then?
Partially, because they want to bring back more of the demigods. That's part of that whole. I mean, it's a religion of giants, right? They're
Yeah.
the demigod representatives, as offspring, the giants are, to run the religions and to run the governance for the pantheon of gods. And so you have this term in the Bible that people probably haven't really recognized from the King James Version Bible is called the terrible ones. And there's a
Yes.
branch of the terrible ones in Isaiah 25 that's going to be destroyed at the foot of a mountain in the end time. And terrible one, they're also located in Ezekiel 32. It's elsewhere too, but I'm giving the two best ones. They're called the branch of the terrible ones, the strong ones. And in Ezekiel 32, you have Pharaoh talking to these terrible ones that are already in the sides of the abyss in the prison. The ones who are slain for being the terrible ones on earth. Terrible one, Erit, in its singular format, but because there's one as it's translated, it should be translated as Iritim, the terrible ones, right? These are ones that are defined as strong, giants, powerful, all, giant sort of terms in terms of, and it doesn't say giant, but strong, powerful, a whole bunch of words like that. But it's describing these bloodlines and these kings of these nations. And so they have, as part of their definition, a fertility issue. They're childless or infertile. And it's generally, I think, referring to the females. So I think even though God knows that giants are going to show up after the flood, because he leaves free choice even for the fallen angels and to do what they want for a time within certain rules and regulations, he's going to ensure that they can't multiply in huge numbers like they did before the flood. They're going to have this difficulty. So they have to take in humans because of that. Otherwise, they're going to go extinct.
Sure. Wow. I just had a thought here, and I'm sure it'll come back to me at some point. When you were mentioning when you mentioned the angels that fell, I think it's an important thing to touch on just briefly here, because a lot of people they read about Jude and they read about the angels who sinned being held inside the abyss until the end of days, until the great and terrible day of the Lord. Yeah. And a lot of people try and associate that with, okay, well they fell, they sinned, so that's the same angels. But it's incorrect. The sin that they're talking about in Jude is specifically talking about those angels who disrobed from their oikaterion to engage in sexual intercourse with humans to then create the Nephilim. So I think it's important that for people to know that though that third of angels fell, not all of them committed to this sexual sin for that first insurgence of the Nephilim.
And not all of them that were left.
Yeah. And so
in the second incursion. So that means there's other fallen angels not in the abyss by extension.
Yeah, because the question was, people have asked, okay, so you had Nephilim before the flood. Well, how they get here after the flood? Well, pretty simply put, more angels decided for the sake of their unrighteous cause, they were going to disrobe and commence to jiggling.
In polytheism, the offspring gods overthrow the parent gods and they kill them. You can't kill something that's immortal. Maybe God can, but angels can't.
Yeah.
So what happens is that they have their own rebellious Saba, host of heaven, army, rank and order. So they would just move up after the parents were taken away before the flood. So they're ruling after the flood. And they walk amongst humans just as Baal does, just as Mot does, just as Anki does, offspring god of Anu, Leal, offspring god of Anu, just as Zeus, offspring god of Kronos, just as Osiris is an offspring god, Isis is an offspring, right? So, and these are the ones who procreate after the flood. And what's another interesting thing is that's why in the Ugaritic text, they're trying to bring them back to reproduce more Rephaim, who are ones who could actually heal themselves as part of the definition. Yeah. That's why you have to take them off at the head and suddenly, so they don't have time to repair. And so 7495 is Rapha for heal, as in Raphael, healer of God, right?
Wow.
Okay, but it's the root word and partial meaning to 7497, which is the giant, and partial meaning to and source word for 7496, which is evil spirit, shade, disembodied spirit of a Rephaim, right? Because
now is that 7495 H or G?
H.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep.
I got some studying to do.
Now, in the Ugaritic text, what's really important about that is that this is a city that has all sorts of giants, right? It has the assembly of the Dat-Tanu, the assembly of the Tuatha De Danann, the tribe of Anu. It's got many
Mm-hmm.
different alliterations. And what's also interesting is that you have the Raphaim and the Raphaim, which are the Raphaim, then it's RPM in the original Semitic, which is the root word for Raphaim. And these are post-Diluvian giants. And you have the city named Ugarit. And so that is split into Ug and Arit.
Hmm.
Now, take Og back to Hebrew, and it's Og, translated OWG, rooted in a word that means round or stout, which is
Mm-hmm.
Ug, UWG, so UG. Arit is terrible.
Hmm.
It's the city of Og, of the terrible one.
My gosh, man. I need to study an etymology at some point in the future here, because wow. Wow, wow, wow. Um, so I'm gonna insert this here real quick too. So for those who are just tuning in, what we set out to do at the beginning of this topic is number one, to address the brutal violence that we see inside the Old Testament, because you see Israel coming up again and again and again against these tribes of nations during their conquest of Canaan, where they're told to wipe out every man, woman, and child. They're told to slaughter every I guess clutch of livestock that these people had, burn everything to the ground, only save the gold, silver, and bronze vessels for service of the Lord. And so a lot of these tribes that we've already covered inside here were in fact these Nephilim or Rephaim, these gigantic human angel hybrids. Some of them, as Gary mentioned, were bona fide giants. Some of them were bona fide hybrids. What is understood, though, is that they were damned abominations by God himself. And as such, he demanded that they be eradicated from this plane of existence.
Well,
And
and
it's
they also squatted God's land.
Yeah, that was, and
And
another big
defiled
thing.
it.
Yeah, and that's a big thing that people will touch on because they say, "Oh, well, Israel's coming into Canaan and taking their land." Not true, because if you
Not
if
true.
you look
Not,
at
yeah.
the book of Job, when the sons of God are presenting themselves before the Lord, and he's saying, "Hey,
Mhm.
where have you been? What you been up to?" You
Yeah.
know, Satan's there among them. Those
Yes.
Canaanite tribes knew full well for those 400 years that that land belonged to Israel, but yet they still decided to lay down this genetic minefield
So
just waiting for them.
the land of the Hamites was gifted to them as the land in Africa. The only
Ah.
tribe that didn't move there was the Canaanites. So they illegally squatted, and I think they were trying to lift the curse burden from the curse of Ham that happens right after the flood as being in servitude
Sure.
by aligning themselves with the giants. And they probably thought they may have been accursed anyway, so they might as well just sort of go ahead and do that. Now, where I make my understanding that I mean, we know God gifted the land, but where I
Mhm.
take my understanding from is Deuteronomy 32, which leans on Psalms 82. So Psalms 82 is the council of the gods, right? This is the council that answers to Satan. That is a different council than the council that Satan reports to, even in the book of Job 1:6 and 2:1.
Mhm.
This is the Nephilim world order, as opposed to Nephilim. Nephilim, which is the
Yeah.
Nephal, is the
The
root word
fallen,
for Nephilim, which means fall. I am, put the male plural on, what do you get?
the
Fallen
fallen
ones.
ones.
Yes. They're the Nephilim of the Shemaim. The Shemaim are the heavenly ones. So heaven comes from the plural Shemaim. Shema is the singular. It's never used in the Old Testament. It's always heavens, the old plural Shemaim. And so if we understand that, then we can now link what's being talked about as the prince of this world is the the New
Mhm.
Testament, that they're ruling this world for a time and they control the world, just as Satan was trying to offer Jesus all the kingdoms of the world because he
Mhm.
had legal rights to that for a time, right? Okay. Now roll that back to Deuteronomy 32, which is very, very important.
Mhm.
And I cover this off a little bit in the first book and then really in detail in the second book, and define Israel in a way, because you have different translations of that. People need to understand that. I don't want to go down that definition right now because it'll take me 15 or 20 minutes to explain. But
Sure.
Deuteronomy 32 with the sons of Israel, that the number of the nations after the flood are numbered by the sons of Israel, or the sons of Jacob, born in Egypt. That's 70. That's the same number as the 70 patriarchs, not all named. There's 9 that aren't, in the table of nations that inherit the lands, right? And you had 7, and it's the same number as the 70 sons of Adam before the flood. So
And the same number of the 70 apostles that Jesus sends out to go minister.
Yeah, it's an amazing, it's perfect harmony in terms of how the Bible sort of works in that sort of manner. So the whole world was divvied up amongst the gods that rule from the ruling council, and divvied up amongst through the ranks of those leaders of those fallen angels that rule this world.
Wow.
The land of the covenant was reserved for God for his purposes. So that both the giants and the Canaanites squatted God's land and defiled it and did every abomination they could in that land, and then waited knowingly through their gods that they worship for the nation of hope to be born, return, and then wipe them from the face of the earth, just as the Amalekites swore to. And the book of Psalms outlines all of those nations. And it's the Amalekites that stirred up all the other nations and got them going, even after they were defeated, to wipe them from the face of the earth. And every war that you have with Israel from that point forward is in response, except for the taking of the land, when they give them notice to leave before they go in. Every war after the conquest that Israel is involved on is that those nations are trying to wipe Israel from the face of the earth.
Yeah. Okay. Now, correct me if I'm wrong here, but the main reason God says you are not to interbreed with them, you don't give them your sons and daughters in marriage, neither will you take theirs. I believe that that's specifically because he has to have a pure human bloodline in order for his son Jesus to be born. Can't be tainted with angel blood. That seems to me that was a big issue that even the Moabites, the tribes descending from Lot, had run afoul of, because they were right there. They were right there in the mix of it.
And as a dwelling place for the spirit that comes from heaven. And it's defined as habitation, as you mentioned, oikotarian in Jude 1:6, where the angels come from. And they need a new oikotarian in the physical world if they're going to interact physically. So they create a soul and a body. That's from this world, spirits from heaven. And so what they do is that and you have this one other use of oikotarian in Greek in the New Testament, and that's 2 Corinthians 5:2. That's a house in heaven. So it's that dwelling place.
What we desire.
And temple of it's God's house. It's God's temple for God's spirit, not for a counterfeit spirit. So Israel, which is a nation of priests, either spiritually or physically, were held to a higher standard to keep both of those pure. And if you're going to create a lineage for the Messiah,
got to be a pure bloodline.
It's got to be a pure bloodline.
Very good. And for those who want to chase this rabbit hole down, I encourage you to read through the book of Joshua, the story of Rahab the harlot, and then jump straight to Matthew and go through the table of nations that lead up to Jesus's genealogy. And you'll find that for her kindness and for her saving the 2 spies that came in to scout out Jericho, she was included in Jesus's his genealogy. Very, very cool story there. Well, all right. So you covered a number of them there. So I can skip the Avim, the Avites. I can skip the Kafarim. I can skip the...
So the Avites are the Avim as well, if you've got that on the list.
Yep, I've got
either
Avim.
It's with 1 V or 2 Vs. It's the same.
I've got them both.
Yeah.
So let's see. We skipped Ephraim. The Ekronites, I believe you touched on. Those are also Philistines, correct?
Ekronites, that's a city of Philistine.
Okay, cool. Yay!
Right? So it's part of that confederacy. So
I'm tracking with you. And you mentioned the Emim already. Now, were the Emim, were they hybrid or were they giants?
Emim were giants.
Okay.
So and they're listed as giants in Deuteronomy 2 as Rephaim. So they're part of the greater Rephaim. There's a Rephaim race, and then there's either vernacular names for different tribes or different creators from different gods. It's hard to know. I think there's a distinction. Otherwise, they just all of it would be called Rephaim, but they're
Sure.
called by a lot of different names. So, and the Emim were part of the War of Giants in Genesis
Yes.
14.
Awesome.
I cover them off in the Bible. I cover all the giant nations off in the second book, and I do the Emim in the first book too. And they were, I think they're defined as causing someone to have terror. They're part of the terrible ones.
Bunch of bad dudes over here. So
well, can you imagine these things that were that big? Now, can you imagine that most of the ones were made that that we get accounts of had a snake face, from seraphim, serpent-faced angels as watchers.
Nightmares.
Yes, and so you already have this long neck. You already know they're twice as wide. They're monstrous. They would bellow with their voices. If you've ever seen that movie Stargate and the Goa'uld, and they have that bellowing voice, that's what they're emulating. And they also were called the Shining Ones because they had these large wraparound eyes that glowed and would light up a room. Again, just as they're kind of depicted with those eyes in the Stargate series. And then they had these elongated giant skulls that were sutureless.
My God. My gosh.
No wonder they're so frightening. And if people want to get a look at a diluted bloodline, Google Akhenaten, or go visit an Akhenaten or King Tut museum that travels around. He has this long, extended, protruding chin, thin serpentine-like lips, high cheekbones, large wraparound eyes, this elongated skull that he usually is covered with this huge hat to cover that abominably big head. And you look at him and you see a serpent's face. I swear it.
Easily. I've actually been to, there was an exhibit that came to the Burpee Museum in Rockford, Illinois, which I went to, and they actually had a replica of his sarcophagus there. And they had a bust of, it would have been of Nefertiti, and somebody said that this was made for her to practice her makeup on, which I don't know that I believe that. Maybe she was just really trying to get that wispy cat eye, because they're not twins, they're sisters. But they talked about the headdress, which went about a foot off her head. And I looked at that and I thought, this girl probably had this gigantic egg head, and that was the only way that you could actually cover that up properly.
There are depictions of her without a hat, and it's exactly as you described it. This big egg head. Like, it's just, I mean, it's just, I mean, as a human, I find it disgusting. I'm sure they didn't, but
I don't know. Maybe Dan Aykroyd
I'm
get down on that.
There. I can't help myself.
Oh, gosh.
And then they also stunk. They had a sulfur smell to them too. So,
it's funny. You go down the rabbit hole looking into Sasquatch and the Sabe, and they talk about them having a very powerful odor as well. Also having some crazy lung capacity for roaring. Well, moving on here. So we covered we did the Emim, the Ashkelonites. Did I just mention them?
Ashkelon, that is Philistine city as well.
Awesome.
So a lot of the ones that are listed as giants are redundant because they're named after cities, as people of that city. But
all the same people class then. Gotcha. So then that covers then the Gazites or Gazathites. Also would be Philistine there. Then we've got
Gaza. If you see Gaza and Aza, that's the same word in the Hebrew. It's just poorly translated.
Gotcha. Okay.
Could be one or the other are consistent at least, but it's not.
Would that be like Azites or Azites?
Yeah, they'd be because it was a Philistine and or an Avim city. You would probably have classified them, and I do as Avim.
Avim. Okay, got it. All right. So next up, we've got the Geshurites, and you already touched on Gibeonites. But who are the Geshurites?
The Gibeonites I didn't touch on.
Oh, you didn't? Oh, well,
I did not.
Wonderful.
So let's call them the Gibeonim.
Okay, Gibeonim.
Because these were giants, and there would have been, and they also produced down the road, and maybe even at the time of the Exodus, they would have maybe had some hybrids as well. So classify them as both. The Gibeonim were a division of the Hivim, Hivvim. and a
Okay.
branch of the Horim, just as you have Hivim mentioned in Genesis 36 as well. And I think it's Lotan is both a Hivim and a Horim as he's listed there. That's how closely they're related. But the Hivim were more, in this part of the giants, more closely settled into the central region. And then you also had some Hivim that were part of Mount Hermon as well. So there's
Okay.
different areas of the Hivim. And then if people have heard the Hurrians, that's the Hurim. As you take that back to Hebrew, that's three different branches of a similar kind of giant. But the Hurim were more in the north and between, let's say, Mount Hermon and Mesopotamia into that region,
Okay.
and very much closely associated with the Syrians and the Hittites as well. So they're a part of that region. So, yeah, so chalk in Hurim, which you don't have, won't have
Yep.
on there. Nobody has ever listed the Hurim. That
How
took
do
a
I spell
lot of
that?
edit. The easiest way is just Hurrim.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah, it's actually going to have a CH spelling as you take that back to Hebrew, just as Horim is Chorim, but the C is silent, so to
Got
speak.
you.
So that's three different groups. And so the Gibbonim were actually part of the Hivim, as the account in Joshua talks about as you go through that whole chapter. They're referenced as both.
Okay. That clears up a bit more of my list over here.
Now,
And then
the peace
adds
treaty that they made.
yes, where they showed up looking like little
Yeah,
vagabonds and
yeah.
oh my gosh, we traveled so far,
And they
help us
become
out.
woodcutters, which is connected to the branch of them in Mount Hermon. As you take that definition back, they become also temple servants as part of that treaty.
Interesting.
That's it. I mean, they said, we're not going to destroy you, but we now know who you are. They
Sure.
show up downstream as temple servants called the Nethinim.
Nephilim.
So in the time of Ezra and the second temple
Yeah.
and building, you get that word. That's who they are, the descendants of the Gibeonine or the Gibeonites, as they're listed in the
You know, it makes
as
sense
they're
as
translated in the Bible.
well, it makes sense as to why they were made cedar cutters. Who better to carry those gigantic trees
Yeah,
than gargantuan
yeah.
individuals?
Whether they're hybrid giants or true giants, they're
Yeah,
still
we're
big
just
and
super
strong.
strong.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Um, okay, awesome. So then
And
Geshurites,
then
did we hit Geshurites?
no, but I think there was another one that you mentioned in there before the Geshurites. I'm just one, but it
Mm,
doesn't really matter.
yeah.
Um, we'll get to them all anyways. Geshurite is not listed in the table of nations.
Okay.
None of these giant nations are.
Okay.
And the Geshurim are giants.
Geshurim.
And they have two areas where they live. One partially in the Mount Hermon region, and
Okay.
then another region that's down with the Amalekites and Malakim, but towards the Egyptian border. So
Okay.
when David is warring, after he's sent away by the Philistines, he goes and his city where he's living is attacked. He's going to go attack the Amalekites that weren't part of the war by the border, and the Geshurites and the Girgashites
Okay.
that were all grouped together. So that would be the Gershim.
Gershim. Okay.
Which if you got Girgashites listed, that's the Gershim.
Yeah.
And again, they're not in the table of nations.
Interesting. Wow. So gosh, I think we're almost actually I think we are about halfway through the list that I've got over here.
Yep.
We have covered a lot of ground.
There's more to name and eliminate.
Yeah, we're gonna get there.
Yeah.
I just want to read off a couple of comments here that we've gotten.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and again, thank you so much, Gary, for taking your time to chat with us tonight because I am learning as much as I'm sure everybody else is here. I've all but given up trying to take full notes over here because it's such an amount of information. I'm probably gonna watch this back in halftime. That way I can get everything done. Let's see here. We have from Power Keg Greg. Which tribe was considered the most violent, and what was the reason behind such brutality?
That's a good question in terms of who would be the most violent. I mean, certainly the Philistine Confederacy had
Yeah.
a huge reputation, and Israel did not even take them on when they first came out, and then they marched around to avoid them.
Mm-hmm.
And then they were the nemesis for over 400 years until David finally subdued them. So I would think, and they had this um, amalgamation confederacy of all of these other giants that they brought with them from Crete, plus the ones that were related to them in the southern in the southern region, and they're a part of what I call a larger Southern Alliance after they expropriated the land. And so there was a Southern Alliance there before, but it was now they're going to become the dominant part. But you have the Horim and the Malachim and the Amalekites and the Horites that are all part of this Southern Alliance. The Southern Alliance
Interesting.
goes right back to the War of Giants. And you can understand the campaign by understanding there's a Southern Alliance, a Central Alliance, a Northern Alliance, and an Eastern Alliance. And you can understand the campaigns better that way of the
Sure.
Exodus Wars.
Sure.
So I would put the
Outstanding.
Philistines as being that most powerful. I would say the most vicious were the Mesopotamian descendants that eventually formed the Assyrian Beast Empire. And they would flay people. They would absolutely tear their body parts off,
Oh,
chop them all up. They would
jeez.
skin people, and they would impale people, as Vlad the Impaler did.
Gosh.
Nineveh was the city of blood. Of course, Nineveh is the city of Nimrod, and between his intermarriage and the Eastern Giants, is you get the formation of Nineveh and the Assyrians and the Beast Empire. And of course,
Hmm.
all the Beast Empires are bloodlines of these powerful kings of the Rephaim bloodlines. So Egypt, they're created through giants, and you have like the Zuzim of Ham,
Mm-hmm.
which people wonder why are they trying to combine Zuzim and Zamzuzim? Zamzuzim were in the Mount Hermon region. It looks like through some archaeology there was a little bit of Zuzim further south, but the Zuzim are of Ham. That's Africa.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So that's where they were located. And then you have other giants like the Perazim and other things. There's intermarriage that's going to form the Pharaoh dynasties, but that's the first one. Assyria's the second beast empire, right? And then you have Babylon, the third
Yes.
dynasty is kind of as part of, and then you have the Persians, which is again part of that the third dynasty as well as the beast empire. And then you have the Greek bloodlines of the giants as the next one. And then the Romans from the gens Julia and Romulus and Remus, Nephilim and Rephaim from
My.
two Greek gods as they produce that. So you have all of these beast empires that are interacting
Mm-hmm.
all with Israel from the birth of Israel into a nation where they were in Egypt. And then Egypt tried to wipe them from the face of the earth
Mm-hmm.
as they escaped to Assyria. They invaded. They were trying to wipe Israel from the face of the earth. They were stopped because the southern kingdom repented, but the northern kingdom was destroyed and dispersed. Then the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar is listed as the terrible of nations. He
Hmm.
is one of the most terrible of the ones. He's going to take Judah into exile. The Persian king, and then at the time of the Persian kings, you have a descendant of Agag, Amon the Agagite,
Oh my gosh. Now, who is
who wants
Darius
to
in
wipe.
that whole mix?
Well, he's part of the Achaemenian kings and the Persian Aryan bloodline. They
Wow.
even they even admit it. I write that about in the second book and cite the examples out of history. So,
I need it. I
um,
need it.
right, and but one thing the Persian king with Cyrus does is he permits, as with the Medes, is that they permit the temple to be rebuilt, and Judah gets to go back, but they're still part of the whole
Mm-hmm.
experience of Israel and Judah. In this case, what's left of only the southern kingdom. And then the Greek Empire comes in and invades and completely takes over um, the Judean Empire, and they start to install and support a Edomite kingship, with the Romans are going to officially
Sure.
install, and then you have the Romans. That's the Herodian kingship that I'm talking about. That's Edomite. And then you have the Romans, who are going to invade Israel as well. And then they're going to destroy Jerusalem, destroy the temple, and send them in the diaspora. Those are all six are beast empires
My
that are trying to
goodness.
wipe Israel from the face of the earth completely. And the only time that we see more beast empires are in the end time.
Mm-hmm.
And what are they trying to do? They're going to try and wipe Israel from the face of the earth again, along with Christians grafted into that covenant.
My gosh. Thank
And
God
then
the
Antichrist is the
144,000 are
beast in
sealed.
the eighth empire. So,
Gosh. Yeah, again, to reiterate, thank God the 144,000 are sealed to not have to endure the worst of that.
yeah.
Wow. Well, excellent. Soundly handled there. Another question here. We've got, let's see. Do we think the Nephilim descendants are still in today's world?
Their descendants are. They call themselves the Royals. And people need to look at where that word comes from. So typically Ra, R-O-I or R-O-Y, comes through Old French as king, and as regal back into Latin. And AL is a transliteration of EL.
Hmm.
EL is the word small case for an angel or a god. They're the kings of God, the
Everything's a
Royals.
counterfeit.
And people say, well, yeah, you just substitute that transliteration in. No, not really. Let's look at Baal,
Sure, sure.
Baal. In the different languages, you can have EL that will show up as ILU in the East, AL, also ALLAH. That's more of a feminine format, but you have several different transliterations of that same suffix that's used to denote a god of the pantheon.
Wow.
So, yeah, these are the Rex Deus, as they also like to call themselves.
Wow.
And there's, as I said, I mentioned one of the main gens, the gene of Isis. I mentioned the Julia gens. If I didn't name it by name, that's the Romulus and Remus bloodlines
Okay.
of the Roman royal families that Caesar and Augustus come from, the Italian black nobility, in
Hmm.
large part, not all, because there's a Middle East influence on some of that black nobility. Then you have also the Albigens, this is another one, which a lot of the more northern Europeans take their bloodlines from. But they all track those bloodlines back to their patriarchal Nephilim, Rephaim, and God. And they
Wow.
all received the divine right to rule from the Council of the Gods on Mount Hermon.
Wow. 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 Do some digging, guys. Acts 17:11 always applies to any of the streams that I do, and that encourages you to not take anything that Gary and I are saying here as the God's honest truth, but you are empowered to do your own digging into the subject. You will be enriched for the
Yep.
toil, and you will learn a thing or two.
So,
Wow.
did I answer that question?
Yes,
The
yeah,
royals,
very,
and
very
are
thoroughly.
they around? Yeah. So,
Yeah.
and look at King Charles III, for example. He says he has his genealogies that go back to Vlad the Impaler,
Hmm.
right? And he has genealogies that will take him back further. So, who's Vlad the Impaler? Well, he was, character that Dracula was based on, and his imagery is the imagery of Vlad the Impaler. And Dracula means son of a dragon, son of a seraphim, a
Wow.
heavenly dragon, right? Um, he was a red-haired, pale-skinned, hazel-eyed, Tuatha De Danann descendant, the tribe of Anu, the Datanu,
Oh my
same
gosh.
color hair as the Horim, which were part of that whole Tuatha De Danann, larger sort of name
Sure.
for the nomenclature of tribes there. And that he took his genealogies back to the Agrathi tribe of Greece and northern Turkey, which was descended from a son of Hercules, son of Zeus.
Wow. So now this will probably answer the question
Yep.
immediately following the one that was just asked, and it was, have I missed the part where the original vampires come from?
Well, the vampires is based on a lot of history, but and a few different sources. So like there's female vampires and there's male vampires and there's some different kinds. But the vampire mythos, as we understand it today, is really based on Dracula, right? And as a serpentine dragon, son of a dragon, Dracula means that the seraphim were the ones who created the original Nephilim, and then most of the giants again after the flood. As being watchers, and we get watcher that does show up in the Bible. It shows up in Daniel 4 times, and it goes back to
Mm.
the Hebrew word ayir, which means watcher, and it is the last part of the compound word sa'ir, S-A with an apostrophe, which means the first part is shaggy, hairy, and goat, watcher. A degraded satyr is a
Wow.
degraded watcher.
Wow. My
It's like a Pan
God.
god. It's like a Bacchus god. It's like a Cern god or Cernunnos god. All the different, the
Wow.
Faunos god. There's Inus. There's so many of these ones that show up after the flood. Not all of them immediately went to the abyss, but we know they were very sexually deviant.
Mm-hmm.
And why they disappeared? Because they're in the abyss.
Wow. Wow. Okay, so here's another question for you then, just of my own. With the angels who did sexually sin with man and then go into the abyss, did they get to just live out their life until they in their mortal form died and then they were sent to the abyss? Or was that like a, hey, you copulated, now you're pulled out, you're now in the
Yeah.
abyss?
Well, I think what happens before the flood is that they're allowed to continue until the flood happens, right? So when in Genesis 6:4, they went to, the daughters of men, the sons of God. And we know sons of God are angels for a
Yep.
lot of reasons.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we'll just talk about Job 38:4-7. The
Sure.
sons of God were there at creation with the morning stars, in other order, stars, angels, host of heaven. Um, Sons of God are used interchangeably as the
Mm-hmm.
same kinds of beings, but there's different ranks and orders. That's the only thing you have to keep in mind on that. So in Genesis 6:4, they did it again. Now, I understand that to be probably again after the first 200, as the book of Enoch refers to, that there was originally 200. We don't get that biblically, but seems reasonable that that might have been the case.
Sure.
Whether or not, there was giants that were created, but then again, several times maybe up to the time of the flood, because there
Okay.
was so many more giants. But after the flood as well is how I would interpret it. That it's kind of open ended.
Yeah.
So you don't have to restrict it to just before the flood. You don't have to restrict it to again only after the flood. It's just again over and
Would
over.
would you think it's reasonable
but
to
but to answer your question,
oh
after the
yeah.
flood, the gods only walk amongst humans for a short period of time. So after Baal and Ashtaroth and all the other gods like Zeus and um, around the earth, they're probably similar gods. Once they produce those giants, they kind of disappear. And so I think they get hauled off rather quickly, just as
Hmm.
all of the fallen angels who did the crimes before the flood were all lined up at one time at the time of the flood and taken into the abyss. And then we get into this worship of the demigods as representative of the gods. But
Hmm.
remember, they are the disembodied spirits of the giants, that they're a counterfeit spirit that's not permitted to sleep. Human
The
spirits
demons, the
sleep until
shades.
until our resurrection or rapture for some fortunate people that will be raptured. Um, but they weren't permitted to sleep and they weren't permitted to heaven. So there's something called in Greek history hero worship. A hero is a Nephilim or a Rephaim. They were the local tyrants, the local tyrannus, the local
Mhm.
Gyges of Greek mythology, descendants of Hercules. They're What is it? I'm not going to get it. Herculides, as the bloodline of Hercules goes. And when they died, they were very upset because they either committed suicide or the body was rotting away or somebody killed them and they weren't able to repair themselves, so they lost their heads. And if they weren't permitted to find their way to the other world, or weren't automatically, as one of the terrible ones, sent to the sides of the abyss, they would come back and haunt their local people.
That's where we
And the
get the
hero
demons
worship.
from.
Yeah. And so you do get these devil gods that aren't satyrs, that are these shades that are talked about in the Old Testament. So there's two different kinds of gods that they're worshiping, and that these are the demigod spirits that they're worshiping, and they're known in Taoism as the vagabond ghost demons that would come back and haunt them. And they would put talismans up and things like that. So
Sure.
and people think that, you know, the ghosts that they see are their ancestors. No,
Nope.
no. That's demon
Counterfeits.
spirits. They are the offspring, the disembodied spirits of the giants that aren't in Sheol and aren't in the abyss prison. They're the ones that are to wander. These are the ones that Jesus ran up against, like Legion.
Yep.
And where it says you see them defined as evil spirits, you see them defined as unclean spirits. And you also see them defined in Jesus' accounts as devils. And that's a very bad translation.
Yeah.
That's the
Agreed.
Hebrew word, that's the Greek word daemon, for demon.
Hmm.
And they're all used interchangeably in those accounts. So the same type of being. And it's not diablos that is used to translate the devil as in Satan. It's a different word in every application. When it is devil for Satan, it's going to be diabolos. When it's a
Sure.
demonic spirit, it's daemon. And so we know that there are these disembodied spirits that are haunting and possessing humankind and causing all sorts of grief for humans.
Fantastic. So I think it's important for anybody out there who's sort of unfamiliar with what Gary was just talking about. The Nephilim, because they are damned offspring, they're made ineligible for resurrection. So like he said, they're cursed to be shades. They're cursed to be these disembodied spirits. When a Nephilim dies, their spirit is stuck here, and that's where we do get our demons. As such, they are seeking embodiment because that's the only way that they get a chance to taste life again. But
And rest.
correct me if I'm wrong, because they're spoken of only being able to wander through dry places, waterless places. They're sort of condemned to that. But correct me if I'm wrong here. The reason why they tend to attack their host so much, like throwing them into fire and convulsing them, is because their spirits are incompatible with our just regular human framework.
Well, there's a war going on. It's not a symbiotic relationship. You have
you're trying to
a
force
foreign
themselves
spirit
in and push
coming
us
in
out.
and suppressing the host. So if it gets that bad, it'll kill the host and then
Wow.
leave and try and find another one. It is pure evil, right?
Yeah, and what better way to lull a person into a false sense of security than showing up as your grandma or your grandpa and pretending as though they're here to guide you on some great journey in life. No, they're trying to get you to lower your guard so that you invite them in and they push you down to a corner inside your own psyche and then wreak havoc with your body.
Now, get this. This is how well they've brainwashed the whole world with this thing that, these are, everybody has these spirits and they're wandering
your
around all over the
familiars.
place. Yeah. Here's another example of how well they brainwash us, because they controlled the complete nobility class, all of the arts all throughout. So when you go to the old theaters, they have makeup on or they have masks on. And that's to either hide or represent the spirit that they are channeling. And so it's the same mask that's used in China, only they actually get more accurate with those theater masks, that they're very demonic looking.
Those Yoshimitsu looking dudes with the teeth like this and like that.
Oh, yeah. And all sorts of painted things. And you see all these really weird statues of these things all throughout Asia. It's the same imagery as the shaman with that pale white face and what they do with the Day of the Dead celebration.
Sure.
Right?
Like
it's the same idea with the crazy clown aspect with the demonic trickster spirit that they're trying to channel through them. It's the same as the Joker, right? In a deck of cards, which is the Joker, the jester in the royal court, that is to hide a polytheist priest in the court who advises, but he's there in this role so that people don't recognize him. And if he doesn't do what the king wants, or doesn't make the right prophecy or the right potion or whatever he's there to do, they took a knife to them and they slit him up like this. Now, roll that forward to Batman and the Joker. That's the exact imagery. And Batman is a superhero based on ancient giants. And I talked about the Zabalba and the bird-faced giants in the Popol Vuh. And in the Popol Vuh, they have a branch of the Zabalba, which is the Camazots, who is the house of Bat. And if you Google Camazots, you get this imagery of Batman's outfit.
Oh my gosh.
How is that for connect? It just, and that's the way they run. Everything is like that.
Wow,
and it's funny, but it's horrific when you
yeah, like it's so dressed up, and they know full well exactly what they're doing. Like, this is not some big joke to them. Like, it's very serious to them, but we're made to go and enjoy the flowery colors, and we're made to enjoy the intense action, but that theme that runs through there. My gosh. I was just digesting that for a second here.
Yeah, that was
wow. I can tell you were having fun there. Well, I'm gonna got a super chat here, and then we're gonna get back to our lists here. Thank you for indulging our questions there, Gary. It's another one comes from Thomas Furman. Thank you again for the super chat, Tom. It says, Mr. Wayne, what is your favorite book you haven't written? Also, do you have a good biblical joke? Hopefully not about Balaam.
No, I don't have a good biblical joke. I don't think it's wise to joke about the Bible.
Yeah.
Or the Word of God. I just try not to. So I'll pass on that one. What's my favorite book? Boy, I don't know. I've read so many books. Yeah, no, I mean, you know, other than the Bible, I mean, oh boy. Yeah, no, I'd have to think about that. I just, you know, I was a voracious reader, so
sure, we'll come back to that one there.
Yeah.
Wow. So anyway, I think we left off with the Gibeonites and Gibeonim. Next up, I've got the Gibalites or the Giblites.
Yeah, I've not made any connections to them that they are a separate race. They might be. Gibalitis, it was a city associated with Petra and the Amalekim, but they seem to be a city of the Amalekim. And so I think the Gibalites would be just Amalekim that lived in that same city. Because again, understand that Petra was the royal city of the original Amalekim, and they set up in a Pentapolis-like city. And typically, the Gibalites were associated with the Petra people as well. So in more of the ancient side, you know, right? So yeah.
So then they'd be classified more than as hybrids then of the Amalekim?
No, I think it's like the Anakim being called Gittites. From Gath.
So
yeah.
Then will we classify them then as giants then?
Yes.
Okay. Awesome. Just marking these off. Next up, we have the Girgashites or the Gershim.
Yes. And the Ben Gurg.
Wait, Ben Gur, are we like you're saying like Ben Hur?
Nope, Ben Gur, GRG, in the Ugaritic texts.
Okay.
So the Girgashites are a Canaanite hybrid race, part of the families, and the patriarch is probably Gurg. That's listed in the Ugaritic text, sons of Gurg.
Okay. Gerg. What a name. A lot of G's inside their names.
Yeah, it's got some connections, and I won't go through it right now, but there's a lot of connections back into Mesopotamia with Gerg and the people there too. So
Very good. Okay. Next up, we have the Gittites, Philistine from Gath.
Hittites, yeah, from Gath,
Awesome.
Anakim.
All right. We already touched on the Hivites already.
Yep.
Would they be rendered as giants or hybrids?
As an ite, a hybrid.
Okay. Is that sort of like
As
rule of thumb if it's an ite
Hivim, yeah,
hybrid?
Hivim, Hivite.
Gotcha.
Hivim, the
Okay.
giant, Hivites, some of the offspring, and you get accounts of both. So you have to be careful in terms of location and who they are and what they're doing. So Hivites were generally Canaanites that interbred with the Hivim. The
Okay.
Hivites, like Hamor and others there are several Havim kings would rule over them, in terms of a different sort of city or location. But
Got you. Okay. That clears up one of my discrepancies that I had inside my own research here. Thank you for that. Um, and I know I mixed up Hivites with Hittites. Give us
yeah,
the rundown of them.
Hittites are sons of Heth,
Heth, okay.
right? And Heth and Sidon and Canaan are the ones who provided the daughters to the Rephaim to create those 9 tribes,
Now are we talking
right?
Canaan, Ham's son?
Yeah.
Wow.
And one
Wow.
presumes that Canaan and Heth and Sidon produced hybrids as well, but married daughters of giants because they're named as the patriarchs for the Hittites, for the Canaanites, and for the Sidonites.
Got you. Okay.
Just as Timnah and Eliphaz. Timnah was a Horim, Eliphaz was son of Esau, to create the Amalekites, and is listed in a different sort of genealogy accounting in Genesis 36 with the Dukes.
Got you. So then, when we see Canaanites, I know Canaanites is sort of an all-encompassing term for those tribes residing in Canaan,
Yep.
but is it also a classification for a specific tribe
Yes.
within them? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And so the Sodomite Pentapoles in the giant war that we were talking about would have Rephaim kings over actual Canaanites. But you are
Okay.
right that Canaanites is a generic term for all of the tribes, just as Amorites is sometimes thought to be a generic terms in the application for all of the Canaanites as well. So let's just talk about some of the names of these kings of Sodom.
Yeah, give them to us.
So Bera means son of evil. Shinab, splendor of the father, or the shining of the father, because they were the shining ones, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right. Shemeber, lofty, just as fallen angels and kings were the lofty ones,
Sure.
of lofty from Mount Hermon. Bela, to swallow up or destroy, from Baal and Bel.
Sure.
Yeah. And I think the last one is Shemeber, but I can't remember what that one means.
No
Off the top.
worries.
Yeah.
Gosh, they really seem to well, like
Oh no! Did I mention Bersha? That was
no.
probably the one, and that means wickedness and iniquity. So all of the names were describing terrible ones.
Yeah, it really seems like the name begets the form with these
Yeah,
guys.
yeah.
Wow, wow. Let's see. We're closing it. We got about 17 minutes left. We're sort of
Okay.
closing in on the end of it. Let's see if we can squeeze a couple more inside here. So let's see. Did we touch on Horim already?
Yes.
Okay, got them already.
Giants. Yep.
Now I've got Hurim, Churim. You covered that for me here.
Yep.
We got the Jebusites. Let's get into them.
Yes, they are a patriarchless Canaanite nation.
Okay.
And
Patriarchless.
So generally, it's thought that Jebus was the patriarch for them.
Okay, Jaboose. So we're talking
And
giants then here?
hybrid giants.
Hybrids. All right. If anybody had a bingo card, you're probably at blackout right now. um, let's see here. The Cadmonites.
Admonites, yes, the people of the East, the QDM, as are recorded in the Ugaritic
QDM.
texts, original ancient vowelless Semitic and Hebrew. And they are the Cadmonim, and they are the people of the East and part of the giants of the East when we talked about the Mesopotamian giants,
Okay, so
part of the
then
Mighty Ten.
okay, that's you pulled the thought straight out of my head there. I was just going to ask if they were sort of part of that confederacy.
Yeah, so the Hebrew word is kadmoni. Put the male plural on, we put the I am kadmonim. And it also means oriental, but generally from the east and east of the you know east of the Euphrates River for the most part. So
Interesting. Um, let's see here. We've got next up, we have the Kenites.
yes, so again, and the Cadmonim don't have a patriarch. The Kenites don't have a patriarch, and the Kenazim. So it's the Kenim, the Cadmonim, and the Kenazim. I call them the ancient KKK. So once you know that, you won't be too surprised that all of the imagery of the KKK as they're known today, which are National
Sure.
Socialists and Aryan belief system, they have serpents, cyclops, giants, realms, all occult language in there. It's just another left-wing polytheist initiated organization.
Very
So
interesting.
so you've got the Kenite, the Kenim that comes from Kayan or Cain, meaning smith, and rooted in Cain, as in Cain before the flood. But I think it's more of an eponymously they name themselves after that, or you can believe that giants made from the Canaanite line survived the flood. That's another option. I tend to think that they've just accepted that name. They're listed in the Ugaritic texts as the QNI as part of the Rephaim tribes, so we know they're Rephaim. And as I said, no patriarch. And the Kenazim is Hebrew Kenizi or Kenaz, and it also means Eastern people as well. So again, part of that same children of the East in the Judges War, all sort of sources the word for that amalgamation or that alliance with the Amalekites and the Midianites after the flood. They were bolstered by those Eastern giant nations. After the Exodus, yeah.
Far out.
Yeah.
Brief question here actually comes from Ken Ami. Did God seek to be rid of the Nephilim via the flood?
God is Alpha Omega. He knows the beginning from the end. He knew angels would rebel. He knew Adam and Eve would fall. He knew the giants would be created by the fallen angels before the flood. He knew they would redo it again after the flood, or they would find a way to save them. He allows everything to play out through free choice, so that all the names that are written in the book of life before creation have a chance to not have their names blotted out through free choice. The Adamites were created as the resolution for the angelic rebellion, and that's why we wind it up with most of the details in the end time. And at that time, we start to be resurrected to be like angels and to also judge those angels for their crimes against humanity and against the earth. And then you have another 1,000 years to wrap up the final details and a testimony that we're no better than angels, because those who survive into the millennium, at the end, they will rebel as well.
Man. Well done there.
But then we go off to eternity, and God has told us everything from the beginning to the end. So,
man, what a time to be alive. Well, let's see here. We got about 12 minutes left. Oh, can we make it? Can we make it?
We'll try.
We're lightning round here. All right, we got the Kenizzites.
Covered them.
Oh, we gotta get them. Shoot, Kenazim. Okay, I need to type that in here. While I'm typing that, the Macathites.
Yes, giants.
Awesome.
And Makkah is one of those patronymic names for kings and for queens. Just
Interesting.
as David marries Makkah from the
Michael.
Gerzites of Mount Hermon,
Oh my gosh. Oh,
produces Absalom, who tries to take over
yeah, and gets
the
real,
kingship
real.
and usurp the bloodline and the Messiah
Yeah, he gets real, real
blessings and
abusive
everything.
there too.
Yeah.
My, oh
So
my
the
gosh, that.
Maccathiim are giants. Yes.
Wow. Okay. Then we have Nephilim already covered as a general.
Yep.
Some people list them as a separate tribe, but it's just a general, sort of like the
It's a general
Canaanites.
name for them, and the ones before the flood is how you would understand that.
The Perizzites.
Perazim, part of the Mighty
Perazim.
Seven and Mighty Ten. Yes, giants. No
Excellent.
patriarch.
We've already covered that the Philistines were an entire confederacy, not
Yep.
exactly like was I guess
But
was there ever
specifically, hybrids were the Philistines who lived amongst the giants who helped produce the hybrids that they became, right? So,
okay, so then would that be just like sort of like with Canaanites, their own separate tribal name?
yes. Yep.
Okay, cool.
I
Awesome.
mean,
So they do
they're known by a lot of different names. I put them all in the new book. There's several different names for them, all similarly pronounced, but
that
they're
is that
Cretan.
is
Yep.
that is wicked helpful because my spelling is atrocious,
Yeah.
just so you're aware. Okay, just a few more here. We've got the well, obviously we have the Rephaim as sort of an all-encompassing
Yep.
term. Was there ever
And a tribe as well.
okay, pulled the thought out of my head again. We're on that same wavelength here, Gary. You touched on the Sidonians briefly. Part of
Hybrids.
the are they part of the Philistines?
No,
No,
they were part of the hybrids that made up Tyre and the Phoenicians. And Sidon City
that's
was
right.
part
That's
of the
right.
Pentapolis city. So the kings were like King Hiram and kings like that all have a Rephaim bloodline and recorded in the extrication texts as being demigods and things like that. So,
Got you.
anyways, yeah,
Was Sidon that wasn't a coastal city, was that?
yeah, close to a coastal city.
Okay. Very good. This one here's a layup for you. We got the Zamzumim.
They are giants, and they are different from the Zuzim, as I think we talked about earlier.
Yes.
Related, so they lived alongside the Emim, just a little bit away, so across the Jordan River. And I think I can't quite remember. It's either just north of the Eming or just south of the Eming, but outside the Og and Sihon Empire of that period. Um, that would have been the Rephaim territory immediately around parts of Mount Hermon, just as you have the Gershim, I mean, and the Maccathim and a couple other nations around Mount Hermon
Okay.
as well. So, but anyways, they were related to the Zuzim, but distinct.
Okay. Gotcha. And we've already tackled the Zuzim, so we did it. We knocked every single one off of my list here. So my final question is, are there any others that I didn't have over here? Did I miss any
Yes.
of my bingo squares?
Well, yeah, you have the Cherithim
Okay.
and the Pelathim from the Philistine Confederacy. You need to put that in because they're part of those giants that came from Cyprus and Crete, I mean. So,
Okay.
did we miss any? Oh, let me think. I think you did a pretty good job on that, and I
Eh,
thought we'd have some more weeded out that were duplications in terms of cities. Um,
wow.
but off
What
the
a
top of my head, I'm not thinking of it. None are coming to my mind. I have to get the whole list in front of me, but
sure. Yeah. I'll suffice to say, I'll send you what I have over here,
yeah,
and if any notes in the margins would be greatly
yeah,
appreciated.
yeah.
Um. Well, oh, wow. We finished with 7 minutes to
See.
spare. My goodness. Um, this has been a lot of fun, and I thank you again, Gary, for helping us set the record straight here and get
Did
down
you
to
did you did you get the Kaftarim?
yes, I've got the Kafarim over here.
Okay.
Part of the
Uh, I,
Philistines.
Yes, but a separate group.
Okay.
I've got some notes here on some things, so I'm just seeing whether or not there's anything that might pop up out of that. It's not a complete list, but I don't think we've missed any. I think that's most of them. So if
Outstanding.
I come across any other ones, I'll shoot you an email.
Outstanding. We have one final super chat here, which I'm actually going to answer this one. Thomas Furman says, does God knowing what you will do preclude the existence of true free will? And the answer to that is no. We have a fantastic story with David while he's being pursued by King Saul. This is when he's on the run and Saul wants him dead. I can't remember the name of the city that he goes to, but he inquires of God. He says, hey, if I stay here, will Saul come and take my life? Or if I go, essentially, will I be free? Will I be okay? And God says, yeah, if you stay, he's going to come for you and he's going to put all you guys to ground. God knows two things there that haven't happened yet, but potentially can happen. It didn't preclude David's ability to have free will and make his choice, because God knows two things that can and will happen given what David decides to do.
Yeah. And it doesn't preclude that God may not intercede at times to ensure all the names that were written in the book of life have the opportunity to come and choose to keep it there or have it blotted out. So, the creation of the nation of Israel is an intercession.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Jeez. I just started I just finished Deuteronomy today for I think the third or fourth time through, and I'm in the book of Joshua, and hearing Moses recount all the goings on, all the pitfalls, all the things that God has done for them. It's like, wow, what an exercise in patience the Lord endures every day.
And what was so interesting about that Alpha, Omega, and free choice is in the Holy Covenant that they're provided, and they're given so many chances. But the thing that he did provide them as well is you can have the future play out through the blessings of the covenant or the curses of the covenant. But if you choose to hold up the covenant, we would have had a whole different result in terms of the history that we went through. But the end result would be similar, would just be played out differently without all of the violence, and probably maybe even shorter. But God knew that they would not hold up the covenant, and so the covenant is being fulfilled through the curses. And so they've had the diasporas. They will be remembered again. They will be brought back into the covenant in the end time, just as the covenant lays out, called by name, as the book of Isaiah talks about. And there will be an exodus, and Jesus will lead them in that exodus, and they will accept Jesus as the Messiah in the last 3.5 years. And if you want to get a better understanding of this exodus and a resurrection and something that's different than happens with the church, you need to read Ezekiel 37 with the dry bones. That is the resurrection of Israel in the last 3.5 years. In the time of Jacob's trouble, when the breaker comes to break them out of the prisons in the year of the Lord's favor. And then after they're being raised back up, all of Israel passed and Judah passed. They're going to go and be judged. And then you read about second Exodus, that Jesus will be leading, as Micah 5 and Micah 2 talk about, that Jehovah will be at their lead. Their Lord will be at the lead in that Exodus when he brings awakened Israel, who the 144,000 in part are there to wake up, and visible Judah, who are in prisons all around the world, leads them back to the wilderness where the people of Judea have fled. And he brings them back into the covenant in time for the supper of the Lamb, for the Armageddon battle, which is the last year of the last 3.5 years. So last year before, is the year of the Lord's favor.
Wow. What a time that will be to see. My goodness. See, 10:58. Looks like we have time for one more question snuck in here at the very end, again from Thomas Furman. Gary, are you a post-wrath rapture or a millennialist?
Well, I look at that in a couple of different ways. I am, in my wishful heart, pre-trib rapture. I am in my research just after mid-trib.
Very good. There
And
you have it.
I know everybody gets there through scripture, but the only way you take the contradictions out is to let all of the passages come together. Or you have to start ignoring inconvenient
Sure.
passages with a preconceived conclusion.
Sure.
I mean, as people talked about, I first read the late great, and he wrote many books, and he was a mid-trib fan. I part company on Hal on that, just because I don't believe the Bible has any contradictions, and I don't think prophecy has any contradictions. And the way you get rid of those contradictions is to put everything around what Jesus said in prophecy, and everything else in the Bible you can around what Jesus said, and not vice versa. The prophets, disciples, do not define what Jesus said.
Mm-hmm.
What the prophet said is defined by what Jesus said.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you put everything around that, all the contradictions go away.
Amen. Well, we have hit the 11 o'clock mark. If you're on Eastern Standard Time, we're at 10 o'clock Central Standard Time. Gary, thank you so much for joining me in this discussion tonight. This has been a ton of fun. I feel like I don't know if I'll sleep tonight for the next few hours. I'm probably just gonna lay awake, just trying to reconnect all the lines here. I would commission you, sir, to draw us up a family tree. If you could, that would be fantastic to be able to see all these connections where they stem from, specifically for the Nephilim and the Rephaim tribes and who their
Yeah.
progenitors were. Is there
Yeah,
anything that you'd like to plug?
No, just that I'll have my new book will be out sometime this year. We're just, as I say, we're working through it. It's going to be called the Genesis 6 Conspiracy Part 2. And it's called, the subtitle, it's called How Understanding Prehistory and Giants Helps Define End Time Prophecy. So it goes through all the giants, angelic order, all the terms you need to help define end time prophecy, because you have to understand the whole context of the Bible. And if people are looking to come see me, if you're in the Atlanta area on the May 26th weekend, there's a Sacred Word conference where I'm going to be doing 2 presentations on the book of Revelation.
Awesome. May 26th, y'all, in Atlanta. Get there if you can. This is Gary's website, thegenesis6conspiracy.com. Again, with that very generous excerpt from his book there. As if you needed any more of a push to go out here and buy this book, treat yourself and see just how far down this rabbit hole goes. Gary, not only did he do a overwhelmingly thorough amount of research into the Bible, but he has extra biblical texts written by credible people that are able to give you the vernacular needed for those times and give you dates and people involved that help tie this whole thing together. So as I said before, do your own due diligence. Acts 17:11 applies. That Berean gauntlet challenge has been thrown down. Sorry, the Berean challenge gauntlet has been thrown at your feet. Receive the word with all eagerness, but search the scriptures daily to see if what you've been told is in fact so. This is the book Genesis 6 Conspiracy, for sale on Amazon. It is $9.99 on Kindle and $26.71 in paperback. Do yourself a favor and get yourself paperback that you can put sticky notes in, because Kindle just does not do it when you really need to go back and find exactly what it was you were trying to remember. Again, Gary, thank you so much. Thank you for everybody in the chats today who contributed. Thank you for the super chats, Mr. Thomas Furman, my boy from Illinois. I would love to have you back on the show to address some more harrowing and wild topics within the Word of God, Gary. Thank you very
There's
much.
lots to cover.
All right. Well, we will see you all next time. Till then, everybody have a wonderful rest of your week, an even better weekend, and God bless you and yours. Take care.